This is my entire grading process from start to finish. We're going to be grading through a short film I recently did in its entirety. I'm going to be going over the visual references I got, how I set up my project, the timeline, building a creative look, shot level grading underneath that look, all the way through to final delivery. One of the very first things I ask for when starting a grade is visual references. These can come from either the DP or the director themselves, but it's basically just to give me an understanding of how they want the overall mood and vibe of the grade to feel across the film. This grade was quite straightforward as I was the DP on this project and my partner Danny directed, so we were in talks the entire process about how we wanted the film to look and feel. And here I've got a couple of references that we pulled together throughout pre-production and even after production, just in terms of where we wanted the colors in the film to land. Now, the majority of this film takes place at a soccer field, and the film itself is quite dramatic and dark. So we wanted to really push for some moodier, deep contrast, pale skin tones, and that cool, almost bluey green. These were our biggest references for how we wanted the greens to look, particularly up in these trees here. We really wanted to get this kind of split tone between the dark, cool, shadowy greens, and then when they get hit by the sunlight, they kind of warm up a little bit. And having such a rich and dense green always contrasts really well with skin. I believe something like this bottom shot was kind of Danny's strongest reference as to how she wanted the contrast between the greens and the skin to feel. So these are kind of our primary reference points for the grade before we dive into it. So let's dive into Resolve, set up our project, do some color management, and we'll start building out our creative look using these references. Okay, so we're here in DaVinci Resolve, and the very first thing I wanted to mention was how important it is to have a well-conformed timeline, meaning that your footage is laid out all on one layer. You've turned off any overlaying graphics or timeline effects, and we've just got the raw footage laid out. We're just starting from scratch. Now, something I would recommend to double check your conform with is an offline reference clip. Now, that's something your editor can supply, and it's just a render of the film, how it was last seen, so that when you bring it into DaVinci Resolve, you can just confirm that everything's where it should be and there's no funky edits going on. So the way we do that is by going to the media page, and up in our media storage, we just navigate to where we keep this reference clip. And I'm just going to right click and add as offline reference clip. And you can see it pops up down in our bin here with a little checkerboard icon in the corner. So now I'm back in the edit page, we can right click the timeline, go timelines and down to link offline reference clip and select the edit we just added to the bin. Now in the timeline that we're grading, all we have to do is right click on our viewer and we just choose a way to view our reference clip along with our current grade. So if I chose something like horizontal wipe, you can see that it overlays the reference clip with the current timeline. Now mine isn't perfect because I've shifted some things around for the purpose of this video, but it just shows how easy it is to see when your edit doesn't line up. You can go back in and make some tweaks to make sure that all your clips are perfectly synced up. Another good mode to check this is using difference, which is just going to overlay the two and make very clear to you which pixels in the image aren't correct. So I'm just going to right click and go no wipe, and then we can jump into the grade. Okay, so a few things that I wanted to point out for project settings. Editing in a 4K timeline. Over in color management, we're using the DaVinci YRGB color science with the wide gamut intermediate timeline color space, as we'll be working in DaVinci Wide Gamut for this grade, and we're just outputting to Rec. 709 Gamut 2.4. So the very first thing I do before I touch any clips or look development is shove it all into a group. So to do that, we're going to hit Control A, select all our clips, and I'm going to right click, add into a new group, and I'm just going to name it Pixus because we used the Blackmagic Pixus to shoot this film. And obviously knowing the camera that was used to shoot whatever you're grading is super important because we're going to need to take that camera's color space into DaVinci Wide Gamut to do our grade and then out to Rec. 709. And now we get this little green link icon showing that all of our clips are now in the same group. And what a group does is allow us to have two separate node trees, one at a pre-clip level. So this comes at the very beginning before any grading we do on our clip, and one at the post-clip level, which is where we'll build out our creative look and we'll transfer from DaVinci Wide Gamut into Rec. 709. Now you'll also notice that I have a few different layers for my clip level grading. Now I picked this up from Cullen Kelly, in my opinion, one of the top colorist YouTubers going at the moment. So if you haven't checked out his channel yet, go do that. But this is a new technique he's been using in his own grades, separating your clip level grading by layers. And the main benefit I found from doing this is you're able to separate your primary adjustments from your secondary, say, and that'll allow you to copy only certain parts of your particular node tree to other clips. That should make a bit more sense as we get into the grade. Now to set up those node stack layers, all we have to do is go into our project settings and down to general options. And we change the number of node stack layers to however many you like. For me, I've got 4, just replicating Cullen Kelly's style where we have our pre-grade, base grade, secondaries, and our film grade. I'm not going to worry about layers 1 and 4 for this, that's a bit more advanced. We're only going to be concerned today with our base grade, which is basically our primaries, our exposure, our balance, our saturation, and our secondaries, which is going to be stuff like power windows, hue shifts, color manipulation, and texture. We'll see all of those node stack layers in here, and we can toggle between our primaries or base grade and our secondaries. So very first step is jumping into our group pre-clip, and we're going to add a color space transform to take our footage from the camera's color space into DaVinci Wide Gamut. So as we use the Blackmagic Pixis, I'm going to choose Blackmagic Wide Gamut and Blackmagic Film Gen 5. And we're going to go into DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. I'm going to leave everything else as is, and we're now mapped into DaVinci Wide Gamut. So on our post clip now, we're going to come out of DaVinci Wide Gamut and into Rec 709. And for me, I have a pre-built power grade for my look development tree. And if I apply that, you'll see it looks a bit crazy right now, but we can step through it one by one with our most important stuff sitting right here. These are our DRTs. So these are just a couple options that I have pre-built that let me cycle between different renderings of my image. They're all taking our DaVinci Wide Gamut color space into Rec 709. This top one here is $24.99. And that's just a free DCTL that I've linked down in the description. It's nice and soft with really nice saturation and a really great free alternative to DaVinci's inbuilt color space transform. Underneath that, we have Referent, which is a transform LUT that Cullen Kelly recently released. That's a really nice, more accurate rendering of your image and gives you a bit more of a finished grade. You can see toggling between $24.99 and Referent. You can see our contrast is a little heavier. In my opinion, it has a nicer rendering of skin tones and greens. Underneath that, we have a film emulation plugin, also from Cullen Kelly, called Genesis. Now, the way I can toggle between all of these just by turning each node off is because this here is set up as a layer mixer, which just means that whatever node is plugged into the very bottom of these inputs here is going to take priority over these other two, and these will have no effect. So it's a nice way of letting me trial out a few different transforms without having to go through and turn each one off and on. Now I actually think Referent is going to be the way to go for this grade, and I'll leave a link down to Referent in the description, just because it's taking us a little closer towards where we want to go with our greens and our skin tones. It's quite a nice rendering. So what the hell are all these other nodes in my node tree here? This top row here, just color charts. So if I turn this on, you can see we get an exposure chart. This one here is middle gray, which is set to the middle gray of DaVinci Intermediate. And these two here are a set of RGB chips. All of these DCTLs I'll leave a link to down in the description. They're just good to have on hand if I ever wanted to switch one on and see how the look that I'm building is holding up against a full range of colors or tones. This second row is where we really get into our look development. So this first one is just a saturation DCTL. This is Pixel Tools Hue Shift DCTL. A really nice way of manipulating hues that I think does a much better job than the Hue Curves in Resolve. And then at the end here, we have Film Look Creator, which really will drive a lot of the look development process in terms of an overall film look. And then right before we transfer out of DaVinci Wide Gamut, I've just got Contour, another plugin from Cullen Kelly. That's just a complete look development plugin where you can adjust your curve, your split tones, your saturation, density, and your hues. For the sake of this video today, I'm not going to be using that. I'm going to keep things nice and simple to a point where hopefully you can follow along if you're doing your own grades. At the very end here, we've got 3 instances of Pixel Tools Checkers DCTL. I believe this one's free, but a really good way of confirming either your skin tones, your white balance, which will just show you anything with basically zero saturation in the image, and your false colors, which will just help you measure exposure as well. Just good to have on hand at the end of every grade in case you need to do some final checks. So if we jump up into the top right of our lightbox here, we've got a lot of nice healthy contrast going on, but definitely need some shot level grading just to get some consistency and some balance going. A personal preference of mine is to have my shots just well balanced in terms of exposure and white balance before building a more intense look on top of that. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go through and purely work our exposure and color balance to just get a nice consistent primary grade across all of our clips. Now there is a change we can make to how these clips are laid out, which will make a huge difference to how efficient we can be when we're grading through such a large project. All we do is go up into View, Timeline Thumbnail mode, and we change it from Record, which just means how it's laid out in the timeline chronologically, so based on the edit, and we can change that to Source mode. We can see it's now grouping these clips in regards to the setup on the specific day of shooting. So you can see all of the shots of one angle in the car are bunched together. We can see the other angle. Really handy for dialogue scenes because we can see every instance of this shot bunched together, which means whenever we do a grade on a certain clip, we can then apply that to every other instance of that clip throughout the timeline. Makes it a hell of a lot more efficient to just ripple whatever grade changes you make to a certain shot to any other time it pops up in the edit. Okay, so I have a copy of my default node tree saved as a power grade in here. So I'm just going to right click and choose apply grade. Now I'm right clicking and pressing that as opposed to just middle clicking that thumbnail, as just middle clicking applies it only to the active layer, whereas right clicking and choosing apply grade will apply that node tree across all of your layers. So first up, I've got my exposure node. And the other thing different here is I've just got my contrast pivot set to 0.336, which is the middle gray of DaVinci Wide Gamut. So handy to have that preset on every node instead of having to change it whenever I want to adjust contrast. I've got my white balance node happening beforehand, as adjusting your white balance before making any exposure or contrast changes just gives a nicer result, I found. And this node in its gamma is set to linear, which just emulates adjusting your white balance closer to how it would actually look like in camera. So it's a bit more realistic. And then on this third node, we've got saturation, which I don't use too often. It's just if a shot comes in a little too oversaturated, I can just pull that down or pull it up just so it's consistent with all the other clips surrounding it. So to keep things nice and simple, all I'm going to do is just use my gamma and gain to do exposure and contrast adjustments on these clips. And then I'll cycle through to my balance node and use my gain wheel to adjust the white balance in each shot, just so we get something a little bit more neutral, but keeping in mind the visual references do want to lean towards a little bit of that cooler side. I'll mention too that I'm only really aiming to spend maximum 20 seconds on each shot. We're just blasting through this. I've pulled up my waveform and my vector scope, and I'm just looking at those two and just making sure things are nice and neutral. And then once I'm happy with it, straight away moving over onto the next shot. Now for this selection of soccer shots here, I've done a general exposure on them all, but I do want to make it feel a little cooler because that grass is coming in quite warm. So to do that to all of these shots, all I need to do is adjust the balance on one. And so I'm just going to swivel that down a little cooler, a little bit more green. And see, that's really brought a lot of that red magenta out of the image. And I'm going to select all of these shots, maybe two back there as well. I'm going to come up to color and ripple no changes to selected clips. So what it's going to do is copy the adjustments I've made on that one balance node. It's going to apply it to that balance node on every other clip that's currently selected. And we get that change across the whole timeline. Now to make that even easier, if I hit Control Alt K or Command Option K on a Mac, if I search for ripple node, we can see ripple node changes to selected clips. And I just map that to Control Shift R to just make it a keyboard shortcut whenever I want to perform that action. Now for shots like this, where I've just done the exposure and the balance and I'm happy with both, I'm just going to hold down Shift, select all of these shots here and just middle click on the shot I've graded and copy that grade across all of these clips here. Now for certain shots like this one, I'm just exposing for the actor's face, just for whatever's most important in the clip, knowing that when we do a second pass of secondary adjustments like power windows, I'll probably use a bit of a vignette here or maybe a magic mask to bring down the brighter areas like the background, always acting in kind of a subtractive method rather than exposing for the background and trying to lift the subjects later. It just makes it a bit easier to manage. Now for this scene, it was quite overcast and the sun would peek through and then the cloud would cover it. So we had some kind of changing light values throughout the shoot. So you can see some of these clips are a bit darker. So I'm just watching the waveform there, watching the change in waveform when it drops to that darker shot. And I'm just going to compensate for that using just gamma and gain. See if I can get them matching a little closer. That feels pretty good. Copy that to this dark shot as well. So they're all feeling like they're in the same world. Another thing I'm doing while I'm working through this is trying to find a solid hero frame that represents what the majority of the shot looks like. So you can see the start of this shot, can't really see much at all. It even starts a little out of focus. You can see as we move through the clip, we get an arm, we get a hand. You can see somewhere around here is a bit more representative of what I should be using as a reference point for when grading this clip. Now I normally wouldn't touch lift, but when we get a shot like this that might have been hit by the sun a little, or it's got an ND filter or something and the black point has been lifted quite a bit, we get a really soft contrast. I'll just bring the lift down a little bit just to give ourselves a bit of a normal kind of black level without going too far. So I'm just going to sit it around there and then bring our gain and gamma back up. Now shots like this, when I find that the saturation is a little too high as opposed to some of our other shots here, those greens are really kind of popping a little too hard right now. So I'm just going to go over to my saturation node and we'll just come down to saturation and just wind that back a little bit just so it feels a little bit more in line with the rest of the image. Okay, that's exposure and balance done for the entire timeline now. See, I'm even finding clips now that I'm like, oh, I actually might just dial that one in a little bit. But to give us a bit of an overview to see if we've missed anything or if anything feels out of place, we'll just head back to the light box in the top right-hand corner. And that's all looking hell of a lot closer to consistency. So I can see up here, might have missed this soccer shot here. I'm gonna come over to this one, guess if I can just copy that grade over. It's a bit bright, so I'll go into the exposure and just gamma and gain that down a little bit. I'm gonna come back up to view, I'm gonna go thumbnail mode and change that back to record so it's the same chronological order as the edit. Now we can see things are looking nice and tidy. It's even might have missed one here as well. That doesn't really line up with this shot over here, so I'm gonna copy that grade over. And another thing to keep in mind is, especially in dialogue scenes where we might grade one setup altogether, while this shot is now consistent with all of its other shots, it might not actually flow with, say, the wide or the reverse dialogue. So something to keep in mind when you're grading this is that source view is good for doing bulk changes to similar setups, the same shot, but it's worth doing another look through in chronological order just to see if everything feels like it's all part of the same scene. So this one's not too bad. I feel like her shots are a little too green. I'm just going to pull some of that out a little bit just to match the wide a little bit more. Might even warm things up. I feel like that's a bit closer. So I'm going to go through and select all of her shots now and do that shortcut Control-Shift-R just to ripple that balance change across all of these. And for this shot here, definitely feeling a lot cooler than the reverse. So I'm just going to come back into our balance. I'm just going to warm this shot up quite a bit and just get some of that skin tone back. I'm not too fussed about the background feeling too warm right now. I'm just really focusing on the subject, making sure her skin tone is looking nice and natural. And then we can use our secondaries, power windows and hues and stuff to bring that all back down. Control-Shift-R, copy that balance through. Okay, so now that we've done a basic exposure and balance pass on all this, usually I would now go in and try and build out our creative look. So I'm going to go back into my group post clip, and this is where I'm going to cycle back to our references up here. I'm just going to find a couple good hero shots. I really like this one, and I'm going to pull up something similar like this one Danny, the director, really liked. I'm going to go up into the top left here, choose split screen. I'm going to cycle this down to selected still images. So we get these two side by side. We can kind of compare what the one on the right is doing and where we need to take our clip on the left. So in terms of the greens, I think we're definitely getting there. Maybe if we cycle to something like this, there might be a bit of a closer representation. A bit of warm highlights going on, but we're getting that really nice kind of cool green in the shadows there. All the greens are really kind of swiveled to that cooler tone. So just from previous experience using Film Look Creator, I know that there is a few inbuilt film looks in here that might do a lot of that heavy lifting for us color-wise. So straight away, I'm just going to go into Clean Slate so that our Film Look Creator is not doing anything to start with. And I'm going to just drag up our film look to 100%. That's not doing terrible things. You can see we're getting some of that like green push in our grass there. I'm not really a fan of what it's doing to the skin tones or the blues in our sky. What I do like is the Aurora film look. That's a new one to Resolve 21. You can see it really takes out all the life and the saturation though. So while it does nice things to the hues of the image, I think we need to bump a bit more of that saturation in. So I'm going to come down to our subtractive saturation here, and I'm going to just bump that up until things start feeling natural again. There is pretty good. If we go before, after, we've got similar levels of saturation, but we're just getting a nicer shaping of all those cooler green tones. We're getting a bit more of that teal in the sky, and it's also bringing in some real nice separation and contrast into the skin tones. I'm just going to try like 0.7 and pull our saturation back in as well. I reckon somewhere there is getting us pretty damn close. We're getting those really nice greens. I'm going to cycle around to a few of these other shots. That's looking pretty damn good. Our greens are exactly where we want them to be. We're getting a little bit of that desaturation and yellowing in the skin tone. And I'm just jumping around to all the clips in the timeline just to see how they're all holding up. This is looking quite nice too. We're getting that cool green, we're getting the teal in the sky, and that like warmer highlights up in the clouds. I'm just going to hit Shift F to get a better view. That's going to give us just our Film Look Creator settings with a big view of our image. I'm going to go later in the film and see what it's doing when there isn't any green in there. Still really like what that's doing. It's given her shirt a nice blue. So I reckon that's a pretty damn good start for building out a look that's similar to those references that were provided. Sometimes it is just as simple as finding the right preset or film look or film emulation that just does most of that heavy lifting for you and then doing little tweaks. Sometimes you're building looks out of contrast curves and split tones and building everything from scratch. But for this one, I think we found a pretty banger starting point for our look. So now that we've got that in place, I'm going to go back into our shot level grading here, and keeping it chronological, I'm just going to go through the timeline and work with our secondaries and see if we can use any power windows or color adjustments just to give it that extra 10-15% towards perfection. So I'm going to jump over into our secondaries here, and straight away on this first shot, our grass is feeling a little warm, a little dead. I'd love to bring some more of that green in like we have in these kind of shots. Going to add a circular window and really stretch that out, soften it up. If we go into highlight mode, which you can find up here, or by hitting Shift H, we can see exactly what we're selecting. I'm just going to take my gamma so don't affect the highlights too much. I'm just going to swivel that a little closer towards the green that we like. You can see already just a tiny little adjustment like that has made such a huge difference. Again, using gamma, I'm going to just roll the wheel down a little bit and just bring some more depth into that grass too. See, that's doing really nice things there as well. I might even just adjust the window a little bit, soften it out even more. Really nice things. You can see we've just made a huge shift to that grass, give more depth to the soccer ball. Might even bring in something like a vignette, the big circular power window, draw our attention to our main two actors in the middle here. I'm just going to use something like gamma to kind of bring down the outsides of our image, take some of the attention away from the extras. Now, the reason I wanted to make this video was to kind of show you how different an actual short film grade can be compared to a lot of the stuff you see on color grading YouTube about having 7 or 8 different nodes to do these crazy things to this one shot, and how that's not really sustainable when you're working across a timeline that might be 50, 100 shots long. You really have to focus on making those big, broad adjustments first, things that make the most amount of difference up front. And then if you have the time, or if the client wants to spend that time doing those little changes, then you can do that. But it's really about taking those big, broad strokes first, getting the image like 80, 90, 95% of the way there. And then if there's a need for it, it's going through and making those little changes. This is all looking pretty damn good so far. By bringing a vignette on this one, she's having a bit of a panic attack in this scene, so it can be good to kind of make her feel really isolated. Just going to center that over her face there and bring down the gamma again, kind of darken out that background, really kind of drawing the attention into her face there. Now, because we're working in node stack layers, this one vignette that I've done, we can copy that across all of our other shots without affecting our exposure and balance on the earlier node stack layer. So I'm going to select all of these clips here where we're in this kind of tight framing. And I'm going to copy just this node stack layer over by just simply middle clicking. I don't want to right click and apply grade because that'll apply all the node stack layers. I'm just going to middle click and you can see that's added the vignette across all of our shots here. Some we'll need to adjust the sizing of, maybe the strength of too, might be a little too strong. Okay, and this is another shot where I would want to kind of darken and bring some green into that grass. What I might do is I'll stay selected on this shot. I'm going to make sure we're in our secondaries node layer. I'm going to go all the way back to our very first shot where we did that adjustment. And I'm going to middle click and copy over that lower gradient that we used to darken that grass there. Kind of even darken it a little bit more just to really create some of that depth. For adjustments like this, usually my rule of thumb is just take it too far. And then when you know it's too far, dial it back a little bit just to where it feels right. So there probably feels a little intense. Bring it back a smidge, somewhere there. You see it's still an extreme adjustment, but it still looks natural. It's good to play it through as well to make sure that no unwanted changes are happening because of that power window adjustment. But that's a static shot, so that works nicely. Now, usually I'd be spending a little bit more time on each one of these shots, maybe doing 1 or 2 more passes than we're doing in this video today. But for the sake of not getting too repetitive and giving you guys as much value as I can, don't want to spend too much time on just adding a vignette here, adding power windows there. Now, these shots were going to be a bit of a pain just because of how vastly different the backgrounds of each of these is. So I think a broad stroke here is going to be using a vignette to really kind of bring down that background just by bringing that down a smidge, gamma and gain. Still feeling a little warm in the background though. Her skin tone's good, but the background is feeling a little too hot. So I might also just use my gamma wheel here, pull things back down to a bit more of that neutral spot. Looking at the brick wall behind them, and just making sure the color of those bricks is consistent. If you really needed to, you could probably do a magic mask on all this. I'm just gonna come down to one of my color nodes here, jump over into the magic mask tab. We're gonna throw a couple points over our actors, turn on our highlight mode. By the way, I do have a dedicated video on the new Magic Mask 2, which I'll link up in the description. But now that we've got our selection, I'm going to switch it over to better. And I'm going to invert our selection just so we're working on the background. And I might darken that down too far and then bring it back a little bit. And then just use my gamma to cool things off. Something there. You can see that's making a huge difference. Our skin tones are staying intact, but our background is getting back to that nice, cool, deep green that we've seen through the rest of the film. Could be a totally worthwhile thing doing. It is like 6 or 7 shots that you would have to do it on, but now with Magic Mask being able to freeze in place, you could essentially render out your Magic Mask and any other adjustments you make anywhere in your node tree. I'm going to force you to render the Magic Mask again. This is a good exposure for when they're walking off, but when we rack focus here, and she touches the back of her hair, we're quite dark. So I might just come down to a power window here. Again, circles, just because they're the most versatile, you can kind of shape them into whatever you like. Going to make a really soft power window here, nice and large, nice and soft, and just use gamma to kind of bring up the levels on the left side here, just so we can see a bit more into what she's doing. Now, if I didn't like how bright this was before we racked focus at the start of this shot, I could always keyframe the level of this adjustment. And how we would do that is by coming down into our keyframes panel here, and you can get to it just by clicking this little keyframe icon. You can see we're on node 3 here. So I'm going to come down to wherever node 3 is down here, and I hit this little icon, and that just means any changes we make to this node, it's going to set a keyframe for. So I'm just going to give it a little swivel here just to set a keyframe, and I'm going to essentially reset gamma, maybe even darken it down a little bit just to take some of that attention away from her for now. And then as we rack to her, by the time we end up about here, I'm just going to pull my gamma up. You can see straight away that adds a keyframe to that point in the timeline. You can see as we go back and forward between these two now, we're now at the point of this node darkening, and we're getting that brightness change as we focus pull to a point where we can see what she's doing with her hair. So there's usually a lot of instances in short films where either there's a really long shot and you've got to keyframe some things, or there's like exposure changes if you're going from interior to exteriors. So it can be worth having a basic understanding of keyframing, because having that extra layer of control over things like power windows and color adjustments can really come in handy. Now with some of these car shots, the exteriors were getting quite bright. So we can give a vignette a try. If I just center it kind of over the back here and bring down our gamma, maybe our gain, try and recover some of that detail in the sky. It's not looking terrible, but if we go into full screen here, you can see it is getting a little brighter towards his head. You can almost kind of see the vignette. I'm going to reset that. I'm going to bring gamma down a little bit, gain down a little bit, just before it gets too noticeable. But then I'm going to go back to my exposure node, and I'm going to move over to the HDR wheels. And I'm going to play around with this light wheel here. So if we go into highlight mode again, either this button or Shift H, and we drag this little slider around, you can see exactly what we'll be affecting with this exposure wheel. So if I drag this up to pretty much just outside of the car, and Shift H again, now whenever we drag this exposure wheel around, we'll be adjusting the exposure of just that higher end. Before, after, you can see we're really bringing a lot of that detail back. And again, that's something we could just ripple across to all of his shots. Control Shift R, or color ripple node changes to selected clips. Okay, once again, we've got a shot where I'd like the grass to be a little deeper, a little cooler. We can see we've got some brown patches at the bottom of the image as well. Doesn't look amazing. Getting a circle node, flattening it out, make it really nice and soft. And I'm just going to swivel that over our grass here. Going to bring down our exposure with gamma. It's already doing nice things. I would love to just get rid of that brown tone. And we can do that with a simple hue versus hue curve. So while we're on this power window and we're only affecting the grass down here, I'm just going to select our yellow markers here. That's going to give us 3 points. If I move this yellow marker around, you can see we're kind of selecting all the grass. And so if I pull this down a tad, you can see that gets rid of a few of those brown marks. We get a bit more of a consistent green down there. That does really nice things. For shots that are a bit underexposed, you can see if I turn the exposure off here, this one came in quite dark, only because I was shooting to retain the highlights outside. But you can see bringing the exposure up, if we zoom in here, we're getting quite a bit of noise in the low end. All I'm going to do is just come in before we make any changes. So before even our balance node here, prepend a node just with Shift S, or add node, add serial before. And I'm just going to go down to our noise reduction tab down here. And my go-to, just after a lot of experience with doing noise reduction, is I usually set this to 2. I set the estimation type to better, and I crank this usually no more than 10 on either one. I think if we just go straight to 10, that does pretty nice things. You can see even in the waveform, it's really cleaning up that low end. Because it is really cleaning up the low end, and we don't really want it to affect the high end too much, as there's no noise there and we want to keep as much detail as we can do a key on this noise reduction. So if we come over into the key tab, we can adjust our luminance key. If we go into highlight mode with Shift H, and we bring down the high end of this so that we're only selecting just the darkest parts. You can see if we get this wall back here, make sure we cover all of that. And then I'm just going to do a really soft roll off and hop back out of that highlight mode. You can see we are having that noise reduction take effect, but looking at the waveform here, it's only happening towards the lower half of the image, and the highlights up here are remaining unchanged. So just a handy little tip to kind of localize your noise reduction without affecting any parts of the image that you don't need to. One other thing I like to do before kind of wrapping up a grade is just making sure all the skin tones are sitting in the right spot. So we can do that with this skin check DCTL here. Pixel Tools checkers, free DCTL. You can see it's telling us where our skin's sitting, if it's too red, if it's too yellow, if it's in the right spot. And if I right click and update all thumbnails, I can go into my lightbox mode. We kind of get an overview of all of our skin tones across the film. We can see some down here are leaning a little too towards green. Some here are probably too red and even off the skin tone chart. So we might need to go back and fix a couple, especially in our hero shot here. We're looking a bit off. Bit magenta there, but pretty good balances. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this on, but I'm going to turn on split view so I can see what the actual footage looks like alongside the skin tone check. And all I'm going to do is go into my secondaries. I got another DCTL from Pixel Tools, which is their Hue Shift DCTL. So lets me control the hue, the saturation, and the density of each color. I'm also going to go up to View, and back down near our thumbnail mode, we'll also have thumbnail size. I'm going to set that to large, just so I can get a better view of the skin tone now that the clips are in a split view. I'm going to close my gallery too. So I can see here things are landing a little off center. Now it's good to keep in mind too that your balance might just be off. You know, you might just have too much red or something, or in this case, it looks like the image is quite cool. So this is kind of leaning towards purple and it's reflecting the blue sky. I think if we swung our red hue around, we wouldn't really be fixing much. That's just part of the shot. What we could try is going into our balance node and just warming things up a little bit. You can see it's making a bit of a difference, but it's going to be a bit too warm for our liking. So I'm going to kind of call it halfway, turn off our split view, head back to the light box. How are we sitting? These ones, she's looking a little pink. So I'm going to turn split view back on, head back. So might just need a little swing on maybe the red hue. Just going to tuck it back into that skin tone world. Leaving a little bit of that redness in there. I'd rather it over green. If we go full screen and do before, after, just looking over here, see she's getting some of that natural skin tone back. These are all looking pretty decent. It was just this one little one here that was looking a bit pink. Turn that off. Yeah, just looking a bit desaturated even. So I'll leave that on. We'll turn split view back on. I'm going to try balance first. It might just be warming it up. It does the trick. Into our reds here and we swing that around. Yeah, something like that. If we go turn that off and we do before, after, a bit more of a natural skin tone. Now we're doing all this while keeping in mind that everyone has different skin tones. That's just how it is. So we're not looking to get 100% accuracy to the skin tone line across the board because it is just a reference point, especially if we had built a look that was skewing the skin tones in a certain direction. As long as we are consistent, then it's just part of the look. Jumping back out to the light box again, and we have a pretty damn good looking film. So in the real world, I probably would be going another 2, maybe 3 passes over this, just really working in the fine details of maybe a power window there, maybe bringing down some highlights in a couple shots, or making sure, you know, consistency is like perfect across the board. But I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of my thought process going through each clip. And it also just depends on what the client wants as well. Sometimes you get really nitpicky clients and they want to, you know, get into every fine little detail, which is totally fair. That's what we're here for. But some clients just, yep, that's a great look. Yep, that looks consistent. Call it a day. So in terms of actual workflow with your clients, either I'll have them come into the suite for maybe a couple hours to a day, and they'll just hang out. They'll get to check everything out on the LG C5 back there. And that's a fully calibrated TV, so they're seeing exactly what I'm seeing on my reference monitor. And it's a very collaborative process where I'm here making changes and we're just going through the film together and we're doing those passes together. So in terms of workflow, there's really 2 options with clients. They're either coming into the grading suite or it's a fully remote session, usually hosted over something like Zoom. With in-person sessions, usually I like to give myself, 1 to 2 hours the morning of the day that we're grading. Usually it's only a day, maybe 2, just to pull together some sort of look and maybe a couple of different looks, just so when they come in, 10 or 11, they have a couple options that I can cycle through and to kind of get to choose one that is the direction they want to head in. Might not be perfect yet, but at least it gives us a good starting point to kind of build off of that rather than just starting from scratch and going like, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like that? I found that it really helps kind of speed up the process. And there is usually one that they're like, oh no, that's the look that we want. Let's just start grading and we can kind of come back to the look from there. In terms of remote workflows, sometimes I'll build a lookbook. So I'll kind of build out 3 or 4 different looks that I think would fit the project and then render out maybe 3 or 4 images with those 3 or 4 alternative looks and send them off to the client just to get an idea of where they want to head with their grade. Sometimes they might say, hey, I really like this look for this one scene, but maybe for the flashback scenes, can we go with this look? So you can never really go wrong giving them a couple of options to choose from. Once I kind of get this first pass done where we're just doing exposure and balancing, I'll do that by myself just because it'd be a bit boring for the client to sit through otherwise. That's for an in-person session, that's what I'm doing by myself in the mornings before they arrive. Then when we do jump on a call, I'll have those looks kind of ready to go to cycle between. Maybe they've already chosen and we can just get into the grade from there. There's definitely a whole bunch of rabbit holes you can go down in terms of getting a clean feed and an accurate monitor, and that obviously gets very tricky when it is remote because they need to be viewing in the right kind of room, the right kind of space, and the right kind of device as well. A lot of colorists usually recommend watching on an iPad because it has what's called reference mode, which is a pretty accurate way of viewing an image. And then we'll just build the look from there. And in the case they aren't on a perfectly accurate reference monitor, I might send a couple stills via Frame.io, or I might do an entire export of our project and send that review link to them over Frame.io as well. I've even had some cases where the client is overseas or traveling and they said, yeah, here's all the footage for the film. This is the look we like. Send us a review link. So I'll go and do a whole day of grading and I'll send them through a link at the end of the day, or maybe after a couple of hours, and they'll make notes on that. And I'll go back through and make those changes and send them another review link. And we go through passes that way. Then we get to final delivery. So there's really only a handful of options when we're delivering a grade. If we go into the delivery page here, I've got a preset up in my export section for a ProRes 422HQ grade. If I'm ever just sending off the clip as a whole, it's confirmed that it's picture lock, they don't want to make any other further changes, then I will just send them one rendered out clip of the film. All they have to do is drag that over their current timeline. It'll be synced up with all the sound and the graphics and pretty much ready to go. So I just render in QuickTime, Apple ProRes, and then choose the 422HQ just to give them the best quality possible, which helps if they're doing, DCP packages, they're, sending it out to cinemas and they need, the highest quality and the most information possible. And then timeline resolution, timeline frame rate. Call it a day. Usually pretty chunky file sizes, but worth it to retain all that quality, especially if you're doing things like film emulation and you're adding grain and finer detail, texture that needs to stay uncompressed as much as it can be. Now, the other option with ProRes exports is if they aren't picture locked or they want a little bit more flexibility when they bring it back into the edit, if there's little last minute changes that they want to make, instead of them having to send me a new edit and I apply the grades again and give them a new export. The easiest way to do something like that is to come up to our presets and go all the way down to Premiere XML. That's going to keep us rendering at 422HQ, but it's going to switch us over to individual clips, meaning each clip on the timeline here, instead of rendering to a single file, it's going to render every clip out individually. Now, to give them a little bit more extra flexibility, we can come down to advanced settings. At the very bottom here, we have add a number of frame handles. Now, frame handles are just an extra certain number of frames at the beginning and end of every clip that you export. So once they bring the timeline into their editing program, they can have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of shuffling each clip around. So usually I'll add, say we're in a 25 frame per second timeline, I'm going to add 25 frame handles so that they get 1 second of wiggle room on either side of the clip. And so when we add that to the render queue and render it out, that's going to pump out every clip with an extra second at the start and the end and an XML file. And their editor can bring in that XML just as a timeline into their software, and all the footage will be synced up with an extra second on either side of each clip to give them a little flexibility if they want to make any last minute changes post-grade. I think that's pretty much it. I've tried to cram pretty much my entire workflow into one video. It's been hectic, but if you've stuck around to the end, that's dope. I appreciate it. Hopefully you got something of value out of this. If I did miss anything, or if you want me to cover something in a bit of a deeper context or detail, then let me know in the comments. I'm happy to make some more in-depth stuff, but I just wanted to kind of make a video that I wish was around when I started this thing and put in a couple tips and tricks that took me a while to find and understand. Again, links to everything I've used in my node tree, all the DCTLs, all the plugins. Links will be down in the description. All the Pixel Tool stuff, I can get you 10% off as an affiliate. So that kind of helps support the channel as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So until next time, have a good one.